Winston-Salem Wolves have partnered with Showcase Sports Syndicate and North Carolina Future Sports to bring you the Juneteenth Classic, a virtual horse basketball competition starting live at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Friday, June 19th, 2020. Starting at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. $500 is on the line. Download Zoom and play horse with players from around the U.S. Registration and more info available at atmbankshot.com. That's atmbankshot.com. And welcome to the Rundown Presents the Greatest NFL Team Ever tournament. We are in the Cowboys region, second round. I'm your host, Desmond Johnson, joined by Brandon Blakney and Errol Marks from the Worldwide Sports Network. What's going on, fellas? Thank you for joining me this episode.
Thank you very much. Locked and healthy, man. Just a blessing these days.
It's getting pretty crazy here as we get to the second round. Pretty much every matchup is something nuts, and I'm trying to switch it up so the judges aren't doing the same regions they did previously. So Errol and Brandon have not been paired together before. Just a quick recap. If you haven't caught any of the episodes yet, or you missed some of them, go to YouTube, subscribe to Sports Carolina Monthly, the channel. That's Sports Carolina, one word, monthly, and you can get all the matchups there. Previously on the rundown, we did the 49ers second round, and they ended up being pretty crazy in terms of the results from it. The 1 seed and the 2 seed both fell, advancing over there. The 1996 Green Bay Packers, the 1994 San Francisco 49ers, and a huge upset, the 2019 Kansas City Chiefs defeated the undefeated 1972 Miami Dolphins to move forward. And in the other big upset in that region, the 2015 Carolina Panthers defeated the 1 seed, the 1989 San Francisco 49ers. So that's a wide open regional over there. The 2015 Panthers, 94 49ers, the 96 Packers, and the 2019 Kansas City Chiefs. So one of those four are going to come out of that region as the leader over there. Let's go ahead and get it popping over here in this region. This region is the Cowboys region, and it is led by the 1 seed, which is the 1992 Dallas Cowboys. But first, the first matchup that we'll be going through today actually is the 2 seed, one of the stronger 2 seeds that we actually had in this entire 64-team tournament. The 1999 St. Louis Rams taking on the 1968 Baltimore Colts. I do need to mention, too, before we begin with picks and whatnot, we are sponsored by Blue Naples Pizza in Kernersville, as well as Body Patterns Fitness and Wellness in Kernersville. Definitely check both of them out online. They've got specials going on right now while we're not really in a stay-at-home. We're in whatever we're in with coronavirus right now. Rules to the game. Both Brandon and Errol will get an opportunity to debate which team they think would win this hypothetical matchup. If both of them agree on the same team, then my vote is meaningless and I do not vote. If they both pick 2 separate teams, and I become the tie-breaking vote, and that team will move onward into the round of 16, the Sweet 16 here. One of you guys want to go first on this matchup here, the Rams taking on the Colts, or would you like for me to select who should begin?
You could do it.
All right, let's see. I'm gonna flip a Pokemon thing here. So Errol is the Pokemon thing, and Brandon is the other side here. And it goes to Errol. So Errol, you go first. Oh, and also keep in mind too, the higher seed has home field advantage. Whoever is the higher seed, we play underneath the rules of that team's era. So in this instance, we'd be playing not in 1968. But in 1999, Errol, you have the floor. Who would you select between the 99 St. Louis Rams and the 1968 Baltimore Colts?
Well, I was looking at the 1968 Baltimore Colts, and they had Earl Morrall, Jerry Hill, Tom Maite, Willie Richardson, John Mackey. This was a very talented team. They were very good defensively. When you look at the 1968 Baltimore Colts, I always say Baltimore Ravens because you think about the Baltimore Ravens, but they were a very good team. They were a talented team. They had a bunch of Pro Bowlers on that team. very explosive on the outside and the inside. They can run the ball. They had great running back, two great running backs in Jerry Hill and Tom Mate. So they were a very good team. But I'm going to go with the St. Louis Rams. I'm the one who pretty much got them into this round. I love the greatest show on turf. They had so many great, powerful offensive players. When you talk about Marshall Faulk, and you have guys like Kurt Warner, and then you go from Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, one of the greatest offensive lines in NFL history. And then their defense. I'm looking at their defense right now, stacked to the brim. And by the way, Orlando Pace, who's one of the best offensive linemen of all time. You got Billy Jenkins, London Fletcher, Todd Light, Mike Jones, Devin Bush, Todd Collins, Kevin Carter. I mean, look at this team. This is one of the most underrated defenses of some of the seed teams that you have on your bracket. This is a very, very talented team. They're very explosive. They were a team that could have beaten any team at any time in any decade. That's how good they were. They were so explosive. And you talk about Kurt Warner. Kurt Warner is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in NFL history. I don't think people understand how good he was in that 7-8 year span. And you look at his numbers, because remember, he came into the league later in his career. He was like 25, 26 years old when he came into the league. He was an older rookie quarterback. He played in the CFL. He played in Canada. It took him a little while to get into the NFL. And he really, when he went over there with a great coach and a great offense, they built the offense around the offensive line. And then Marshall Faulk, who is one of the most explosive power backs we've seen in our century. And then you talk about, like I said, Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce. These two guys are going to be in the Hall of Fame. If they're not next year, they'll be in the next year after that. They're both explosive wide receivers. Nobody can stop them. By the way, they had great tight ends as well. So I go with the St. Louis Rams in this bracket.
All right. So one vote for the St. Louis Rams, 1999. Brandon, who's your choice between the 2 seed 99 St. Louis Rams and the 7th seed Johnny Unitas led 1968 Baltimore Colts?
Well, first off, I think that was some history right there, because I believe that is the first time I've ever heard of Marshall Faulk being identified as a power back. So that was cool. But moving forward, I think this is a good matchup here with two great teams. I think the thing that really stands out to me is Don Shula is the head coach of this Colts team. Like, how many great franchises and great teams did this guy have a hand in? It's crazy, man. You got Johnny Unitas, a stacked defense, power run game. They also just obliterated teams 13-1. Played in an era that was a lot of Iron Man football going on. And I think that if this game was in their era, they would win this game. But these guys trying to contain the greatest show on turf, I just can't see it, Des, to be honest with you. Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, like you guys mentioned before, the nimble, the finesse Marshall Faulk, 1,000-yard receiver, can line up in the slot all over the field. What are the linebackers back then are running like 4.8s, 4.9s, 5.1s.
Smoking cigarettes at halftime.
Honestly, man, we just got to be realistic here with ourselves. It's too much turf to cover for these guys. I think Kurt Warner, I do agree. Kurt Warner, one of the more underrated quarterbacks, underappreciated, real underdog story, man. I mean, this guy was in the Canadian League bagging groceries. I think about him being like the kid from Little Giants throwing toilet paper rolls in the grocery store. So I was like, a spiral on. Like, what's going on? So, honestly, I definitely agree with you. A very good point, too, with the underrated defense. I think they're underrated. Orlando Pace, a monster at the left tackle position.
I want to say the Rams had the number 1 rated defense in '99 in total yards allowed, if I'm not mistaken. I think they had the number 1 offense and defense. So yeah, I would have agreed. I would have gone with the '99 Rams. Anybody that follows the rundown knows the '99 Rams are one of my favorite personal teams of all time, just from the makeup of them. And from '99 to 2001, 2002, Marshall Faulk was the best player on the planet. Like, he literally was almost untackled. You couldn't really tackle the dude. And I love the running backs. We don't see it as often now in 2020, But back then, Marshall was kind of one of a dying breed of kind of shifty lead backs, could take 3-4 downs. Like you didn't have to sub him out, you know. He could run routes. Christian McCaffrey's the closest thing to it that we got really right now in the NFL.
Saquon too. Saquon can do it too. Saquon
a little bit too.
Yeah.
Saquon is not as and that might be part of the Giants is not using him as much in the passing game this past season and some injuries.
Le'Veon Bell too.
He did it first season. Le'Veon Bell. Yeah. But all those guys, they've all kind of started falling off a little bit, partly because of their situations of where they are. But I look at McCaffrey. I mean, he had
Don't beat on the Jets. Don't beat on the Jets now, man. I know what you're trying to do here.
but my point being, Marshall was kind of Roger Craig was the first one to be this dual threat kind of guy. Yeah. But Marshall kind of took it and kind of shaped it different. It's almost like, I'm not comparing Roger Craig to Michael Jordan, but the similarities of Jordan doing something first and then Kobe kind of being Jordan 2.0. I kind of look at the same way. Roger Craig did this first, and then Marshall was like Craig 2.0 in terms of being even more explosive. And if you couldn't stop Marshall Faulk, it just opened up everything for that Rams offense. I remember the third wide receiver, Azakim. The guy he was taking kickoffs back and stuff. He was fast. I can't remember the tight end. I remember Adam Archuleta on defense. Like, I mean, this was kind of my squad, man. I enjoyed watching these guys play. They did have issues with defensive first teams. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers come to mind with Warren Sapp and John Lynch and those guys. And then the Patriots, you know, a couple years later in the Super Bowl, same way. They would struggle against those teams, and maybe Baltimore might give them a little bit of a game because of that, because they did have a pretty stacked defense. But they're playing in 1999, so the Colts can't really jam at the line. They can't really molest them down the field in terms of whatever. And the Rams were the epitome of a timing type of passing attack. So you can get the wide receivers off of their routes. You could kind of disrupt them a little bit, but I don't think the Colts would have been able to do that. So the Colts fall here to the 2 seed Rams, who honestly, I picked when all this started that I thought they might go pretty far in this, depending on matchups. And so far, that's kind of starting to play itself out here. So we'll see. Just remember the St. Louis Rams advance.
Just remember the 99 Rams got robbed for a Super Bowl. Just remember that. Spygate. So
yeah.
So let's
the 2001 Rams are probably better than the 99 Rams, the ones that lost to the Patriots. The 2001 Rams were like on a mission, and you're right. They just ran into a early Belichick, Brady,
cheating,
camera using cheating squad. So, hey, it's got the Patriots in this tournament like 8 times. So they were doing something right, I guess. Speaking of greatest teams on turf, the team that preceded the greatest show on turf in the St. Louis Rams in our next matchup here as an 11 seed, primarily because they did not win the Super Bowl that they were in, that they were heavily favored. The 1990 Buffalo Bills taking on the 1975 Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the more complete Steeler teams. This is the second Super Bowl of the 70s for the Steelers. All the usual suspects: Terry Bradshaw, Franco Harris, Lynn Swann, Mean Joe Green on defense, Jack Lambert. I mean, literally half of the team is in the Hall of Fame. Meanwhile, the 90 Buffalo Bills were no slouch. And to be honest, I'm surprised teams don't do this today. The K-gun offense, there was no huddle. Basically, they came out open and kickoff, just boom, 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 boom down the field. And you don't really see teams doing that anymore unless they're behind. I noticed a lot of times when teams do it, I've noticed the Cowboys do it. The Panthers used to do it back in the day a little bit just to kind of get the offense going. And it typically works because you can't sub people out and you kind of get in a rhythm. Buffalo was doing this game 1, play 1, all the way to the Super Bowl and ran into a Coke-fueled Lawrence Taylor Giants team that disrupted their plans. Bill Belichick again up in the tournament, defensive coordinator for the Giants. Hey, that defensive game plan is actually in the Hall of Fame in Canton. When I went a couple of years ago, the actual game plan from Belichick made it into the Hall of Fame of how to stop that Buffalo offense. But Brandon, I'm gonna let you go first on this one here. Who would you pick between the 3 seed 75 Steelers or the 11 seed 90 Buffalo Bills? You're playing in 1975.
Yeah, I think the Steelers would have had the remedy for this no huddle offense, and it's called lay you out, because if you're coming across the middle of the field, if you can't get up, that hurry up really isn't going to do you any good with those guys like you mentioned, Mean Joe Green. And I mean, I think there's double-digit Hall of Famers with this group, both sides of the ball. I mean, it was really, I think, when they really started to find their groove as building that dynasty, pushing through into the next generation. It was a great collection of youth as well as veterans on this squad. I think playing in this era where, it was very physical. The referees were looking the other way on a lot of things. And, there wasn't a lot of finesse going on. You had to get down and ugly. They were going to punch you in the mouth. And I just think that they would have had the remedy, and it would have been physicality to slow down this hurry up, because it's hard to hurry up when you're limping.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. It's hard to hurry up when you're injured. So that's a pick for the 75 Steelers. One of the strongest of the 4 Steeler Super Bowl wins in the 70s. The Steelers dominated. Errol, I'll kick it to you. 75 Steelers, 12-2 regular season, the Super Bowl champs, or the 1990 Buffalo Bills, 13-3 regular season, lost a heartbreaker to the New York Football Giants in the Super Bowl.
Well, as you know, I'm from New York, so I'm not a Giant fan, but and I was very young when I saw that 1990 Bills team, but that Bills run from 90 on, they were one of the best teams in the NFC. When you talk about Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Bruce Smith, they had a lot of Hall of Famers on that team. They were no slouch whatsoever. Hurry up offense, very good defense, one of the most underrated defense. And by the way, going into that Super Bowl, a lot of people thought that the Bills defense was better than the Giants defense going into the Super Bowl. And if it wasn't for that field goal kick, I'll tell you right now, the Bills would have won the Super Bowl. So they played better than the Giants throughout the game, and they were the better team. It's just the Giants in the fourth quarter, especially the last 7 minutes of the game, Lawrence Taylor and that defense completely shut down the Bills and really shut down Jim Kelly when Jim Kelly was starting to really stand out from one of the top quarterbacks in the league. But I would agree with you, Brandon. I think the 1975 Pittsburgh Steelers were so much better than a lot of these teams on the bracket. This is one of the most dominant teams of the last 50, 60 years. I mean, you talk about Terry Bradshaw. You look at this offense and Lynn Swann and Larry Brown and John Kolb. And then you have the defense that you talking about, Mean Joe Green. And that defense was the best defense of the some people say one of the best defenses of all time. I would say one of the top 5 defenses of all time. And they could have played it any decade. That's how good they were. So they were mean. And they, like you said, Brandon, if you go up the middle, they're going to kill you. You know what I mean? It's not like it was. It's not like it is today, where some of these wide receivers would go up the middle, and if they got hit like that, they're going to be suspended. In those days, they'll try to clothesline. They'll try to clothesline.
Mel Blunt.
Yeah, they didn't give it. Good.
I was just going to say that the league had to create a rule because of their cornerback, Mel Blunt, out there decapitating people. They had to create a rule basically to allow receivers to be able to run unabated down the field after the first, 5 or 10 yards or something like that. And then in the end, the rule helped the Steelers. That rule helped the Steelers win their second set of Super Bowls later in the 70s because it broke up in their offense with John Stallworth and Lynn Swann and these guys. They're able to run around so the Raiders or whoever couldn't molest them running up the field.
If you saw some of the games, them against the Raiders, they hated the Raiders. And I remember I watched I watched the NFL Network one time. I watched one of those old games in 1975, 76. And I remember one of the wide receivers from the Raiders were going up the middle, and these two corners just clotheslined them in both different areas. This guy went twisting up in the air, flew on his neck. Yeah, I remember that. And I'll tell you right now, that defense was mean. They were mean. So
you know what's crazy? I think about the Steelers are moving on, and they were one of the tougher teams in the entire 64 field bracket. So that didn't surprise me. The Bills hung on as long as they could, but I thought they'd make a little noise. You know, the thing that I think back on, the 70s were dominated by the AFC in the Super Bowl. How weak was the NFC? Because really the Cowboys were the only NFC team to win a Super Bowl in the 70s. You've got the Steelers winning 4, the Raiders won a couple, the Dolphins won a couple. I mean, and you've got like legendary teams, like the Dolphins go undefeated, and then the next year repeat probably with a better team than the one that they just went undefeated with. In fact, I think they're in the next they are in the next game coming up here. The Cowboys go a couple of times and win. The Raiders, like you just mentioned, they're peppered all over this tournament. And then the Steelers, of course, with 4. How weak was the NFC in the 70s? Like, I mean, all the teams you think about, the 49ers or the Giants or the Redskins or whoever out of the NFC, were all straight trash.
Now it's all the complete opposite.
What?
Now it's all the complete opposite.
Yeah, now it's the complete opposite. Yeah. Like everyone, like today, like the NFC is loaded and the AFC's got Kansas City and Baltimore. And,
that's it. And that's
it. I mean, who else is it? I mean, that's it. I mean, I could probably pick 10 teams that could probably easily get to the playoffs in the NFC. Houston, maybe. I guess see how this DeAndre Hopkins thing works out. I don't understand. I don't know how that's going to work.
Houston's going to
the Colts, maybe.
I like the Colts.
But see, that's my point. Like,
I like the Colts.
But see, that's kind of my point, though. It's like I'm going like on some of those teams. Back, I mean, on the NFC side, I mean, you could go just down the list: San Francisco, Seattle, the Cowboys.
Watch out for Arizona.
Tampa Bay.
Watch out for Arizona.
The Saints. Yeah, it's just so loaded. So it's weird how, and in the 80s it was like this, but the other way around. And it was really the NFC East. In the late mid 80s into early 90s, NFC East was winning everything. So it's like it kind of runs in cycles. I just think it's crazy how the AFC just dominated a 10-year stretch, and right now we might be in the middle of seeing something similar to that happening again. So the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to advance to the Elite 8. They knock out the 1990 Buffalo Bills. I was just talking about this team here just going to go, and it's the Miami Dolphins, the 1973 Miami Dolphins. They are taking on the 1977 Dallas Cowboys. Another good matchup here. Both teams were 12-2 in the regular season. The 73 Dolphins are the team after the undefeated 72 season, who many people think might be better than the undefeated 72 season, primarily due to the Dolphins in 72 feasted on former AFL teams. They had only been in the league for like 2 years at that point. A lot of those other teams were weaker, which contributed to that undefeated record. The following year, their schedule was a lot tougher to get through it, 12-2, make it back to the Super Bowl and win. That Dolphins team is pretty good. Meanwhile, on the other side, the 77 Dallas Cowboys, like I just said, they were they were the only NFC team to win a Super Bowl in the 70s decade. Errol, I'll start off with you on this one here.
It's not even close.
Would you like to move forward the 5 seed 73 Dolphins or the 77 Cowboys?
It's not even close. I'm not even, and everybody knows where I'm going with this. And I'm not a Cowboys fan, but it was the Cowboys. Roger Staubach, he was the epiphany of the running quarterback. You look at the running quarterback now, when you talk about Deshaun Watson, you talk about Russell Wilson, you talk about all these guys, Lamar Jackson. This guy was the epiphany of a dual threat. He could kill you by throwing the ball, running the ball, doing everything in the open field. Tony Dorsett, Robert Newhouse, Drew Pearson, Golden Richards, Billy Joe Dupree. I mean, this team was stacked to the brim. And I'm not even talking about the Cowboys from the 90s. I think this team could have beaten some of the teams from the Cowboys from the 90s. Very underrated. Defensively, they're loaded. They were loaded in 1977. And yes, when you look at this team and you try to compare and contrast, most of this team that you're talking about, all their starters were first-round draft picks. Go up and down the roster of this team. They're all practically first and second-round draft picks. So you're talking about, and also, by the way, this was the best special teams team in the league for 3 years. They dominate special teams. So, yes, the 1973 Miami Dolphins were a very good team. They had Bob Greasy. He was a good player. They had a lot of good players. Their defense was very good. I just think in the open field, I don't think their defense could have stopped Roger Staubach. Staubach can kill you running the ball, throwing the ball. And you know what? He wasn't afraid of running up the gut and making the plays and trying to get the first down. Roger Staubach nobody even talks about him. I think he's one of the top 7, top 8 quarterbacks of all time, but nobody speaks about how talented. They say Johnny Unitas is one that really brought the running quarterback into the league. This guy revolutionized the running quarterback position. So I'm going with the Dallas Cowboys 1977.
All right, so one vote for the 4 seed, the 77 Cowboys. Brandon, what would you select here between the 73 Dolphins or the 1977 Dallas Cowboys for the right move on the Elite Eight?
I'm going to be honest, fellas. This was a tough matchup. Two very great teams, two of the greatest teams of all time, honestly. With that being said, I'm going to go with the 73 Dolphins on this one. I think Mercury Morris, that for 954 yards, one of the better running backs, as well as you got Larry Zonk, who rushed for 1,000 yards. Probably easily the best ground game in the league that season. I think that's too much for the Cowboys to hold on the ground. Then you got Pro Bowl quarterback Bob Greasy out there making decisions, getting it out to these wide receivers. They did have some deep threats on that team too. If you wanted to stack the box, they could adjust. I think that the Cowboys offense that year was absolutely stacked, but we're talking about one of the greatest defenses of all time. A lot of no names, but a lot of big names that year as well. You got to look at Bill Stanfield. I think he's going to have something about keeping Roger Staubach in that pocket. 18 and a half sacks that season. I'm going to say it again. 18 and a half sacks that season. Are you kidding? I think he's going to own that edge. I think he's going to be busting through the middle. You got all pro players in the secondary as well. Manny Fernandez at the middle linebacker position. Dick Anderson, Nick Buoniconti as well at the DBs. I think that this team is amazing. You got these guys that held O.J. Simpson, 2,000-yard rusher that year. I mean, they gave up, 14 points in 3 games through the playoffs, just absolutely dominated, holding teams. And they were actually named one of the 8 greatest defenses in NFL history in 2007 by ESPN.com. A defense that doesn't get talked about their dominance, especially through the playoffs. And I think they had enough offensive firepower to complement it as well.
I don't think
Overall, I think it's one of the most complete teams, 12-2. And Don Shula, the genius, is leading these guys. I mean, they didn't have a game within 14 points during their playoff run.
You forget who you forget who was the Tom Landry was the coach of the Cowboys. You forget about that. Tom Landry is one of the great.
I was going to say Landry's on the other side. So we finally have one where I do a tiebreaking vote.
By the way, I didn't say this. I'm sorry. The Cowboys' rushing defense was ranked number 1 in 1977. Their passing defense was ranked number 6. So their defense was just as good, and they could clog in the middle.
Yeah. Hey, we got to get to that vote now, though.
Errol picked the Cowboys. Brandon picked the Dolphins. It's funny because really in every show that we've done so far for the greatest NFL tourney, the 73 Dolphins have popped up in a conversation somewhere along the way in terms of just whatever other 2 teams we were talking about. For some reason, eventually the 73 Dolphins get mentioned as a team that probably should get more recognition than they do. Statistically, they were better than the 72 Dolphins. Say what?
You know how hard it is to repeat as Super Bowl champion?
Right, they repeated. So the Cowboys in 77. We just talked about it. The Cowboys in 77 are dealing with a weaker NFC, so their road to get to the Super Bowl was a lot easier. They defeated the Denver Broncos, who was everyone's punching bag. Late 70s, early 80s, making it to the Super Bowl and not being able to close it out. That Cowboys team though. They beat the Bears 37-7 in the divisional. They beat the Vikings 23-6, and then they beat the Broncos 27-10. So they didn't allow more than 8.5 points a game, something like that, over their playoff run, which is ridiculous. That might be one of the lowest ever, other than the 85 Bears. On the other hand, though, I'm just trying to figure out how this would work because the Cowboys had speed on the outside a little bit too. I want to say Bob Bullet Hayes is on that squad, wide receiver. Tony Dorsett is the running back, if I'm not mistaken.
Beast.
Roger Staubach, like you said. Staubach and Fran Tarkenton are the 2 that really kind of brought into this whole scramble around 60 yards in the backfield like you're in your backyard, and finally just chuck it down the field, 30 yards for a first down. And it was like 4th and 6 or something like that. And my man just back here doing all this, and guys are missing them 3 times on the same play. And then he throws it downfield. It's kind of like Russell Wilson today, but just Wilson's more contained. Staubach and Tarkenton would run literally 40 yards like backwards, like trying to get some room to throw. So that's interesting. I think the Dolphins kind of contain Staubach a little bit there, but I think the Cowboys have too much firepower for this Dolphins team. I'm just thinking Tony Dorsett versus this Dolphins defense. Like, who would win that battle of wills?
Points in 14 games. Ridiculous.
The Dolphins did?
Yeah.
What does that average out to? Was it like 12 points a game, something like that?
Something.
Man,
Just
this
remember,
was a sore thumb matchup when I saw. That's the one that sticks out that I don't know for sure.
Just remember the Cowboys. Just remember the Cowboys' rushing defense was ranked number 1 in the league throughout the year. So they were ranked number 1. And you're talking about the best offensive player on that Dolphins team was a running back. So
but they had 2 of them that was almost 1,000-yard rushers.
I know.
Honestly, I'm leaning towards the Cowboys just from off of my regular football philosophy: run the ball, stop the run. Out of these two, who does it better? I would say the Cowboys probably, just because instead of having a platoon of backs like the Dolphins did, you got to worry about Tony Dorsett coming out of the backfield from Dallas. Quarterback wise, I'm going to give the edge to Staubach over who's quarterback for the Dolphins at 73. Is it Morrill or is it no? Bob Greasy back from injury. And yeah, I'm giving that to Staubach all day. Wide receivers, like I said, you got Bob Bullet Hayes. I'm kind of everything's kind of leaning towards Cowboys when I just break down into other than the coach head-to-head matchup. I'll give to Shula over Landry, but.
You would take Shula over Landry? What are you, nuts?
Yeah, I would take Shula over. I think I would take Shula over Landry. I mean, he's the winningest coach in NFL history.
Yeah, he won a lot of.
He should have 2. He should have multiple scoring.
Yeah, but
he should have won in '84.
He won a lot of games. He absolutely did. But he also he was a coach for a long time. You're talking about he was with the Dolphins.
Right. I mean, we
just
And before that, he was with the Baltimore Colts. We just talked about him in the earlier on. He was on that 68 Colts coaching staff. So, I mean, he's been around a lot. He's seen a lot of football. I'm going to go with the Dallas Cowboys.
They can hold OJ.
Well, no, wait.
55 yards, but not Tony Dorsett.
Yeah, but you're also looking at the wave of wide receivers.
Like,
you're talking about
2,000-yard rusher here. But like, I feel like this is kind of like.
If I looked at the Cowboys right now, and see who they stopped that year, being that they were the number 1 defense in the league, I think you could go through some of the teams that they beat and stopped. They were pretty damn good.
2,000 yards.
Well, here I've got it right here. They in '77 they beat the Vikings, Giants, Bucks, Cardinals, Redskins, Eagles, Lions. They started off 8-0. The Giants again. They lost to the Cardinals and they lost to the Steelers in Pittsburgh. Then they beat the Redskins, Eagles, 49ers, Broncos. So actually, looking at their and this goes back to what I was saying before. Looking at the Cowboys' record, like they didn't really play anybody in '77 that stands out. I mean,
that's not their fault. They beat everybody that was on their on the schedule, but they were explosive. Look what they did in the playoffs. Look what they did in the playoffs. What are you talking about?
Defense?
No, in the playoffs they were dominant. They were dominant in the playoffs.
Look who they beat in the Super Bowl. Look who they beat in the Super Bowl.
They only allowed passing yards in the Super Bowl. They allowed 35 yards passing in the Super Bowl, 156 total in the Super Bowl. Yeah, that's pretty legit. That might be a record, actually. Now that I'm sitting here saying it out loud, that might be the record for yards allowed in a Super Bowl. I know the Panthers were somewhere around it when they played the Broncos in Super Bowl 50, but that's. Who did the Dolphins play in '73?
They beat the Vikings.
Was that the Redskins?
4-7.
The Vikings.
Yeah.
So okay, so and Vikings were one of those teams that they were kind of like the Bills of the '90s, where they kept making the Super Bowl and not winning. Yeah. So I've picked both of these teams already in this round, and I haven't like decided which one to go with here. I am going to go. Yeah, that one really kind of hurt Errol's whole like set right there. The OJ Simpson stat. I'm kind of going with the Dolphins now because they're the
one running back.
It don't really matter. The era is pretty much the
one
same.
Running back. It's one running.
The era
back.
is pretty much the same. So
how do you know they wouldn't? How do you know
the Cowboys had a better?
Get it out of here.
No, my gut says 77 Cowboys because they just have more star power. They just have more star power. Yeah,
the Cowboys would have won.
I'm going with the Cowboys.
Hey, all right.
I'm going Cowboys because Staubach. Really, just the quarterback matchup alone. Staubach versus Bob Greasy.
They're both Hall of Famers.
I mean,
second in the AFC in passing.
Bob Greasy came back from an injury. Bob Greasy.
He's second in the AFC.
He was coming back from an injury.
With 2,000-yard rushers. Are you kidding me?
I'm picking the Cowboys. I don't know. Just something about it. It's like,
I like this guy. I like this guy.
It didn't feel right. It didn't feel right picking the Dolphins in that situation. I don't know why. So the Cowboys move on. We are in the Cowboys region second round coverage here. The rundown presents the greatest NFL team ever. Brandon Blakney and Errol Marks joining me here. We motor towards the final matchup of the second round in the Cowboys region. And that matchup is the one seed, yet again, the Dallas Cowboys popping up here. The 1992 Dallas Cowboys, 13-3 on the season, taking on the 2009 New Orleans Saints, Drew Brees, and that prolific offense, Sean Payton at head coach. These teams are kind of attached to each other because Sean Payton came from Dallas. Probably should be the Dallas Cowboys head coach, to be honest, if he had just waited a little bit longer and waited Parcells out. But he's built something in New Orleans. The Cowboys are the first of their 3 Super Bowls in the 90s with Jimmy Johnson. I just watched the 30 for 30 short again. Jimmy Johnson, the Great Train Robbery, basically describing the Herschel Walker trade and how they basically convinced Minnesota. Well, Minnesota offered 5 players for Herschel Walker and attached draft picks to each player if the Cowboys cut said player, thinking the Cowboys would not cut these players. And Jimmy Johnson looks at the list and goes, I'm going to cut all these players. Like, he didn't tell anybody. He's just like, I'm going to cut them all. So instead of getting those 5 guys from Minnesota, they ended up getting like 3 first-round picks, a second-round pick, a third-round pick. And then they took those picks and traded those off for more. And the Cowboys I think they said in like a 4-year stretch, the Cowboys had like 156 trades or something. Like, they didn't keep any single trade from the position they got it from. They either traded up or down. Yeah, Troy Aikman, and that was the number one.
Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin all came in that trade. All 3 of them.
Yep. Russell Maryland. They went through it. Kevin Smith, Darren Woodson. Those guys came over from trades that started off from that. So, it's crazy. It gives me hope for my Panthers because Jimmy Johnson came in as a college coach, brought in college coordinators, and, it took 2 years, but they flipped the team around. And when they won this in 92, they were the youngest team in the NFL, and they had the lowest salary cap in the NFL that night when they won the Super Bowl. So keeping all that in mind, I'm trying to remember who I had go first in the last one here. I'm going to let Brandon go first on this one between the 1992 Cowboys and the 2009 New Orleans Saints. Reggie Bush.
Yeah, Reggie was young.
Pretty legit Saints squad.
Honestly, man, I was a big fan of the Saints team. Yeah, man, Reggie Bush.
I love Reggie Bush.
So crazy that rookie and his second year, they kind of burnt him out. But seeing him out there, kick return, punt return, throwing him screens, I mean, they were an inventing package for this guy. The receiving core it lacked star power, but like they were deep though in the fact that you had Marcus Colston, Devery Henderson, Robert Meacham, Lance Moore, like they all contributed in some way. They all brought something different. Pierre Thomas was on that team. Roman Harper, Darren Sharper were both Pro Bowlers. I think Jonathan Vilma was a Pro Bowler that year as well, all pro on that team, beat the Colts 31-17. Very impressive group, the Spirit of New Orleans right after Katrina. They blew the top off the dome. If they were playing in the dome, I would absolutely take New Orleans, but we're not playing. So I got to go with the
92 rolls, yeah.
I got to go with the 92 Cowboys.
So they beat
youngest team in the NFL that season, youngest Cowboy team too. A lot of those guys were rookie second year guys coming in. The Doomsday Part 2 defense coming in. I think it was really impressive to me that season. They started off with the previous 2 Super Bowl champions when you mentioned that loaded NFC East with the Redskins, with the New York Giants. And it kind of proved early that they were for real. They were nothing to play with. Like you said, young Michael Irvin, Emmitt Smith coming off his going into his first or second rushing title, consecutive rushing titles, big offensive line. I think they're a real deal, and they beat a really talented Bills team. Really beat the piss out of them, 52-17, which is kind of outrageous.
Yeah, they really did.
Think about it.
Yeah.
So, I think that
game snowballed quickly. So Brandon's got the Dallas Cowboys advancing on. Errol, who are you selecting here between the Cowboys and the Saints? And it might be a tougher pick than seed suggests.
It's a very tough pick because in 2009 they really changed offense. In the NFL in the Saints, they were very explosive. You talk about Drew Brees. That year he had 4,388 yards, 34 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. And you look at the weapons that they had. Believe it or not, they were very underrated. I mean, you have Marcus Colston, Devery Henderson, Jeremy Shockey, Jeremy Bouchard. They had a very underrated offensive line, one of the best offensive lines in the league. They kept Drew Brees on his feet the whole season. He got sacked, I think he got sacked maybe 3 or 4 times that season or something like that. And also their defense, they were stacked too. Will Smith, Cedric Ellis, Jonathan Vilma, Fujita, Greer, Porter, Harper, Sharper, and they had the best kicker in football. They had the best kicker and special teams in football. And by the way, their coach wasn't too shabby either. I think he won Coach of the Year that year too. So
I think he did.
It's hard because you look at the Cowboys. I don't know if that Cowboys team could have played in this era because it's so much faster. Yes, they have a lot of explosive guys. Emmitt Smith, he was a great running back. But if Emmitt Smith ran in this day of game, I don't think he'd be as dominant. I really don't. And yes, you talk about Michael Irvin. Michael Irvin was a great wide receiver. You compare and contrast Michael Irvin to some of the wide receivers in this day, he wouldn't have even competed. Julio Jones and Johnson and even some of the wide receivers that are now in the game. Odell Beckham. Yeah, I see you making faces, Brandon. But Michael Irvin.
Michael Irvin would have been in the discussion for sure.
No. Actually, I mean, it was a different era, but just for comparison's sake, to Errol's point, in '72, Michael Irvin had 78 catches for 1,396 yards, 7 touchdowns, and look, he had 1 rush for -9.
All right,
Marcus, 78 catches.
Different from Mike Evans.
And Marcus Colston had 70 catches for 1,074 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 1 rushing touchdown. And
yeah, 1 Pro Bowl season. 1.
Yep. Yeah, but that's not his fault. He played on a team that scattered it around. I'm gonna take an upset on this one. I'm gonna take the Saints. Because I think they were very explosive, very underrated. Very underrated. And
Damn it, Errol.
As good as the 92 Cowboys were, and they were one of the youngest talented teams in the league with Johnson and everybody else, this team was explosive. And I don't care if it was a dome or if it was outside. Drew Brees proved he could throw on the outside. He won a Super Bowl in a dome, no question that he did. But Drew Brees is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in NFL history. And by the way, I would take Drew Brees over Troy Aikman in a heartbeat.
A lot of people
in a heartbeat. So I'm going to I know you would.
I don't know.
But they're playing in 1992.
I think Drew Brees is
about the dome.
I think Drew
in 2009. They're playing in 1992. They were playing in 2009, no doubt.
Drew Brees out of his dome.
Yeah, for sure.
Drew Brees threw 400. I'm looking at it right now, 4,388 yards. Right. He threw 3,000 yards. He threw. I'm sorry, not 3,000. 2,888 yards in the dome, and the rest, outside the dome. So they're not too far apart with the numbers. They're really not. And he ran the ball a lot. They ran the ball a lot when it was bad weather, because bad weather, they couldn't air out the ball in certain places. And that year, if you remember, when Drew Brees went into like different places, especially when I think he played Miami, how cold it was in Miami and it was very windy. If you remember that, it was at the end of the season. That year, Drew Brees, I was one of his worst games. It was one of his worst games that year. So
yeah,
I'm gonna take the Saints. I like the Saints. I don't know if the Cowboys team of that time could have competed and stayed in touch with the offensive style of game of this time. I think it's too much.
We're playing in 1992, though. So
are we playing in 92?
Okay, so
are we playing in 92?
We're playing in 92. So they can jam the receivers, the line, that kind of thing. So the Cowboys, to me, this is what it comes down to, because
I think the Cowboys, if we're playing in 92.
You pick the Cowboys. So wait,
yeah.
You're changing your Are you changing your pick to the Cowboys?
If we're playing in 92, because I didn't hear that, I'm going to take the Cowboys.
We're
that's the whole thing about the dome. We were in North.
The only thing I will say, and thank you, because you saved me from having to make a vote here. So the Cowboys move on. But we'll say this: looking at the Cowboys roster, there's only 2 people in the entire roster that are, or 4 that are 30 or older, and 2 of them are on the offensive line. Really 3 if you count Jay Novak, the tight end, at 30. But the only thing I could think of that might be a difference maker in this matchup, I'm looking at the defensive backfield for Dallas, and they're starting Isaac Holt, Larry Brown at cornerback. Larry Brown, Super Bowl MVP. Never heard from him again after he left and signed with the Raiders. Thomas Everett and James Washington at safety. This team was before Darren Woodson. I think Darren Woodson's a rookie the following year. Obviously before Deion Sanders, that's 95. So I'm trying to figure the Saints could throw on this Cowboys team. Like, they would be able to throw it around and get behind them. However, the front 4 of the Cowboys defense, Tony Tolbert, Tony Casillas, Russell Maryland, and Charles Haley. And the 4 of them combined for, it was like 20 sacks in the regular season. Tony Tolbert had 8.5. Charles Haley had 6. So you got them on the outside. Then you've got Vincent Smith, Robert Jones, and Ken Norton as your linebackers. So that front 7's pretty stout. And with New Orleans and Drew Brees comes from that breed of Tom Brady, Peyton Manning type of guys where they're only going to sit in like a little 2x2 foot box behind the line, and they're going to move in that box. They're not really trying to scramble. They're not trying to get to the edge or anything like a Lamar Jackson or a Pat Mahomes. They're standing in that box. If you can get them out of that box, it does everything on the offense. Whenever you see one of those Sundays when Tom Brady just looks completely like everybody on his offense, it's because the defense is moving him out of his box. Like he's not comfortable. Or if Peyton was just having a rough day, people were getting out and he was having to step out of that box. This Cowboys front 7 could probably do that to Drew Brees. He'd rely on dumping it out quick to Reggie Bush, like out in the flat, just check downs to get it down. I think New Orleans would have a problem stopping Emmitt Smith, to be honest, and just trying to get past this great wall of Dallas, the offensive line. I think that Emmitt would probably get at least $120 on this Saints team, maybe more. And everything ran through Emmitt. Like, I mean, looking at their passing stuff, Troy Aikman, to Errol's point, Troy Aikman that season only threw for 3,445 yards. He had 23 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. And Troy Aikman's considered one of the most accurate quarterbacks of all time. So, I mean, perception's funny, like the further away we get from certain things. Obviously the Cowboys I would move them on, but they're going to have some issues going forward looking at the other teams in this this region, including
Bracket.
the 1977 Dallas Cowboys that are in this region, and the 99 Rams that are lurking, because the 99 Rams, if the Saints could throw on this Cowboys team, the Rams are going to put 30 on this Cowboys team just from
you also forget about
all day long.
You also forget about the 75 Steelers, who I think is just as talented as any one of these teams. And if it wasn't if it wasn't the 92 rules, I would have taken the Saints. But because it's the 92 rules,
exactly.
like
I think I probably would have too. I think I probably would have too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So to recap here, in the Cowboys region, basically chalk. Actually, it is chalk. The 1 through 4 seeds all advance. The number 1 seed, the 1992 Dallas Cowboys, they move on. The number 4 seed, the 1977 Dallas Cowboys, they also advance. The 3 seed, the 1975 Pittsburgh Steelers, man, and then the 2 seed, the 1999 St. Louis Rams. My gosh, so this is a stacked region here. So we've got those 4, and then like I said previously, the teams that advanced out of the 49ers region, the 1996 Green Bay Packers, the 2019 Kansas City Chiefs, the 1994 San Francisco 49ers, and the 2015 Carolina Panthers. The 2015 Carolina Panthers are the only team to advance to the Sweet 16 that did not win a Super Bowl. Good stuff, man. This is some good stuff here. So we got 2 more regions to go. We still have to do the Bears second round, and we still have to do who am I forgetting here? Bears, Cowboys, 49ers, and Steelers. There's a Steelers region. So the Bears and the Steelers region, we still need to do second round coverage for. From my man Brandon Blakney, from my man Errol Marks, I am Desmond Johnson, and you've been watching the greatest NFL tournament or greatest NFL team ever, presented to you by the Rundown.
Hey there, this is Rod Funderburk, and you've been watching an episode of The Rundown with Desmond Johnson. In order to watch more episodes of The Rundown with Desmond Johnson, please subscribe to Sports Carolina Monthly's YouTube channel.